Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet Earth. This is your host, Rebecca Jernigan, and you're listening to Journeys with Rebecca right here on wolfspiritradio.com and also being heard on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com Studio B. And do remember that both stations, Wolf Spirit and Freedom Slips, are both totally listener supported, so any donations really do make a difference, and it does allow for the continuation of the show hosts and their guests to provide the best and latest information, and of course, and as always, it's not mainstream. Please check my website, journeyswithrebecca.com. A lot of new information there, upcoming guests, there's topics. You can also set up an appointment with newly revised sessions, and of course, the mentorship program. That will certainly assist in the new energies that are here. I have 2 openings left for that, and payment plans are available. There's always the free newsletter to follow, or to sign up, and to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and I'm actually getting available for my YouTube. I just finally figured that out thanks to my beautiful, beautiful engineer, Mr. JP. He's helping me out a great deal with getting that figured out, so I'm going to be starting to upload all the shows to YouTube and all the new ones, as well as doing some live YouTube streaming. Yes, believe it or not, I've got that figured out. So it's all good in there, so I hope that you will follow me and sign up for that. And an update on my book, Night Experiences, Visions, Prophecies, and Alternate Realities. It should be ready for the Kindle version within a week, maybe 10 days. Now I'm going to be sending out announcements for its arrival. I'm just really excited. It's totally beautiful. And I just can't thank my illustrator enough, Maggie, and of course all the people that were behind me supporting me. So I will hope that you will certainly get a copy of that when it comes out. Tonight we have a wonderful guest, and he doesn't really need any introduction, but it's Nick Redfern is going to be on. He's going to be talking about the Slenderman Mysteries. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nick for some of those of you who may be new to Nick or just don't remember. He is actually Hello? Hang on, Nick. How are you? Just a second, babe. I'm introducing you. Hang on.
Okay.
All right. I love it. Nick's a full-time author and a journalist specializing in a wide range of unsolved mysteries that include Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, UFO sightings, government conspiracies, alien abductions, and paranormal phenomena. He writes regularly for the London Daily Express newspaper, the Fortean Times, Fate, UFO magazine. Some of his previous books include Three Men Seeking Monsters, Strange Secrets, Cosmic Crashes, and the FBI Files. And among many of his exploits, Nick has also investigated reports of lake monsters in Scotland, vampires in Puerto Rico, werewolves in England, aliens in Mexico, and sea serpents in the United States. He travels and lectures extensively around the world. He's originally from England, and he currently lives in Dallas, Texas. But now, on to tonight's topic. This is an internet urban legend that comes to life. It's the dead of night. You are fast asleep. Suddenly, you are wide awake but unable to move. Hunched over you in the shadows is an 8 or 9 foot tall, gaunt entity with spider-thin limbs. Dressed in an old-style black suit, its pale face missing eyes, nose, ears, and a mouth. You finally manage to cry out. The monstrous things disappear as suddenly as it appeared. You have just had a terrifying encounter with the Slender Man. Who or what is the Slender Man? His existence began on the internet, but he didn't stay online. The Slender Man may be a tupa, a thought form that can stride out of our darkest imaginations and into reality if enough people believe in it. In May of 2014, 2 young Milwaukee girls almost killed a friend in the name of the Slender Man. Perhaps like the vast Skynet system in the Terminator movies, the internet is turning against us and attacking us with digital equivalents of our own online nightmares. The Slender Man has come to life. For the first time, this book reveals the full and fearful saga. This is absolutely fantastic. You guys, I'm pretty sure you guys are going to have questions tonight. I'm going to ask you to please to remember to place any questions you have in the chat box in all caps so that we can get those answered for you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Nick Redfern. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Rebecca, how's it going?
Oh, I am just thrilled to have you back on. I just love the sound of your voice, and I'm just happy that you're here with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining in.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on the show again.
Well, it's been a while, and there's been a lot of books that I've missed of yours that I've always wanted to have you on and talk about. So I kind of did that pre-introduction there of some of the things that we've covered or you've covered in the past that we've actually never had conversations on, which includes some of the Loch Ness Monster and I think you did something on the Mothman and things like that. And I thought, well, that kind of goes right along with some of this on the Slenderman. But this is a frightening thing. Matter of fact, I think it's kind of interesting because not too long after I had written you to ask if you wanted to be back on the show and get you scheduled, another news article came up again about those girls in Milwaukee and about their sentencing and what happened to them. And I wish I had written it down because, of course, I didn't, being as organized as I am. But they came back into light, and I thought, well, now that's just kind of apropos because you're going to be on. So let's talk about your book. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to get a copy of it and let everyone know, of course, that it's available on Amazon. I would love for you to go ahead and, share that information whenever you feel you want to, just segue into it whenever about where to get it and all the rest of your books as well. But let's talk a little bit about this enigma of the Internet. I mean, that's kind of an interesting correlation that you made with it started as an online thing and it turned into a real life thing as far as how it came about. So I'm going to let you kind of run with that and just tell the story of how you think it got started and what it actually means to be involved with the Slenderman. That's kind of creepy. Really.
Yeah, it is. It's a very kind of strange and weird story. And basically what happened was in the summer of 2009, there's a website called Something Awful. They started this contest and invited people to come up with the creepiest, weirdest creature for the internet era, if you like. And a lot of people joined in with this contest and uploaded various pictures and artwork and paintings and stories. In essence, to try and come up with something like a modern day equivalent of like Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers, that kind of thing, and that people could kind of talk about and create stories surrounding the character and things like this. And one of the people who entered this contest was a guy named Eric Knudsen. And Eric Knudsen is the guy who created the Slenderman in terms of how it looked and also with its name. And for people who don't know, the Slenderman's name is sort of very appropriate one. He's sort of dressed in like a humanoid form in a black suit, a white shirt, black tie, and he has this sort of faceless face, no nose, no mouth, no eyes, no ears, just sort of vague, shadowy imprints where they should be. And he had these sort of weird octopus-type tentacles coming out of its back. And so it looks very creepy, and on top of that, it's extremely skinny and between 7 and 9 feet tall. That's how it's described. And for reasons that, for whatever reason, we don't really know, but Eric Knudsen's creation, the Slenderman, was the one that really kind of overtook all the other contest creations, if you like. And interest in this creature sort of grew and grew to where, even though it was only, something created for an internet contest, people started writing their own fictional stories about the Slenderman, doing their own sort of photoshopped artwork and posting it to the internet. Chat rooms and forums were set up, even Wikipedia pages and things like this. And there was also an extremely successful online fictional show called Marble Hornets, which basically was like a found footage type movie, but spread across countless episodes, each one about 20 minutes long. And it still has a huge popular interest today. Now, that was the situation for round about 4 or 5 months, where the Slenderman remains sort of like this fictional creature, this fictional entity that you had literally thousands and thousands of kids and teenagers all focusing on this creature, the Slender Man, and, as I said, creating their own stories and, chat rooms, forums, that kind of thing. And then something weird started to happen, as I said, about 5 or 6 months after, when people started to claim they'd seen the Slender Man in the real world, which started to provoke theories and fears that the collective sort of hive mindset of tens and tens of thousands of people focusing on the Slender Man had created what's known as like a thought form or a tulpa. The theory being, if enough people focus their mind on something, even if it's a fictional creation, it can have some sort of degree of reality in the real world if enough people believe it exists.
That brings up so many points that we can go into in regards to that, and I've always said thoughts create, right? And if you get enough people involved in something, just like you said, it can create something that becomes very real, even if it wasn't something that was real or wasn't present. So it gets into that whole idea of, the internet. You talked about it being like Skynet. I mean, when I read that in your, in the little description, on Amazon on your book, I was like, wow, that's just amazing how something that was a contest, somebody that was trying to be creative. And I do believe that anything that we actually see, and you can agree or not with this, this is all open for discussion, Nick, but I think that whenever you get into something like that you can actually make something real that isn't real. You can create something, right? You can, it's like a virus. I guess you could call it a virus.
It kind of spreads. You're right. It kind of spreads and spreads, and as I said, the idea of creating things out of the human mind, if there's an intense concentration on the part of thousands and thousands of people, as I said, it's known as a thought form, and that's the English term for a Buddhist term known as tulpa, Tulpa, and within Buddhist teachings, there's this deep belief that if you get yourself into an altered state, your mind into an altered state, you focus on one particular thing, and there are, multiple other people doing the same thing, then it's kind of like giving birth to something, but in a supernatural fashion rather than the regular fashion, And the theory is that when enough people are focusing on it, it literally comes to life in a supernatural form. And the more the people believe in it, the more self-aware the thought form becomes, to where eventually it becomes free of the creators and starts to act on its own independent fashion, so to speak. And then, of course, when the creature is sort of perceived as dangerous and threatening, typically the thought form takes on the character of the fictional one. So in other words, when you create the Slender Man, it's inevitably going to be dangerous and hostile. And so that's pretty much how it really kind of developed and started to take off.
So, what you just said there kind of reminds me of the same thing of AI. We create this artificial intelligence, and then when it grows to human, then it becomes its own thing. And, to me, that's what it speaks to me of. And it's, that's just absolutely scary. It kind of makes you wonder the people that put on this contest, if that wasn't somewhere, some subliminal message or project that they were trying to get off the ground to see if something like this could happen. So, we're talking about the Slender Man here, and, he's in it. And by the way, it bears a lot of resemblance to the man that I used to call the Shadow Man. I actually talk about that in my book. And he's not quite as tall, and he's well more defined than that. And he certainly doesn't have tentacles coming out of his back, and he's not wraith-like. I almost got the picture of the Slender Man as being more wraith-like, almost, not like solid, and, but I was like, oh my gosh, there's just a lot of resemblance, to, my Shadow Man figure and that which is called the Slender Man. But so let's talk a little bit about the idea of the internet, and it's kind of, I don't know, how do I want to word it? Its correlation to Skynet. I mean, you know, it was an internet-based thing for sure, but you know, we especially lately, and I'm sure you keep up with all of this, there has been so much hubbubaloo and negative press coming out about Facebook and YouTube and Google and all of that. I mean, you know, I don't think any of these things started as, you know, malignant things, but they ended up turning out being, you know, quite unfortunately the opposite of being benign, that's for sure. And as far as it's what it's, some of the things that it's producing coming out of it, you know, aka the Slenderman idea. Yeah. So what's your thought process on the whole idea between the internet and the whole Skynet thing? I don't think it's too far off, but that's my opinion.
Well, there's actually a lot of research being done by highly credible scientists now who suspect, and can't prove, but who suspect that bit by bit the internet is starting to become, if you like, self-aware, you know, that it's becoming like an intelligent entity in itself. One of the reasons for that is because there actually have been some really weird experiences people have had, you know, where they've been kind of surfing around the net and looking for certain things, particularly sort of, you know, paranormal phenomena and things like that. And then the person gets hit by that very same phenomena. I'll give you an example. One of the people I interviewed for the book, a girl named Lacey, when I interviewed her, she was a trainee flight attendant. And by her own admission, she became very kind of obsessed with the Slender Man phenomenon, to the point where most of her free time, you know, was taken up by sort of surfing around the net and printing off articles and taking part in these chat rooms and forums, and also just kind of obsessing on it. You know, by her own admission, she did get very obsessed by the whole Slenderman mystery, and wrote a few fictional stories and, you know, surfing around till the early hours of the morning, things like that. And then something really weird happened. One night when she was just closing her laptop down, putting it into sleep mode, she saw, like, just for like a half a second or so, if even that, but it was enough to see it, she saw this sort of faceless face on the screen, which is, you know, the typical face of the Slender Man. And that was followed by another image on her laptop, which was like this sort of a skinny figure in the black suit. And then on the third occasion, she heard this voice say, "We're friends now." And she sort of totally freaked out by this. And it was a case of, for her at least, for Lacey, it was like enough's enough. And she decided to get rid of all her files and papers and all the paintings from the internet that she'd printed off and framed in her office. She got rid of all this completely. And there's a friend of mine named Robin Swope who wrote a book on the Slender Man about 5 years ago. And she also had a copy of Robin's book, and she actually burned Robin's book. She set fire to it and burned it. That's how obsessed and frightened she was. But she felt that that somehow that the internet had interacted with her and had picked up on her obsessions with the Slender Man and had quite literally sort of created like you know, an online version that was then kind of turned its tables onto her, as if, you know, the internet had created like a second or a third version of the Slender Man. And it was then sort of getting its claws into her until she finally destroyed everything and walked away from it. Which again is, you know, one of many examples like that, where people have been spending extensive time looking into one thing on the internet, and then something of a paranormal nature manifests before them, and it's the very thing that they were surfing around on the net for. You know, as if somehow the internet was aware of what they were doing and gave them exactly what they wanted.
Well, you know, certainly I can tell you that the internet is definitely aware of what you're doing. I'm going to give you some examples. Mine are very benign because I certainly don't look up anything like that. But let's say I'm doing some research on magnesium, right? I need to buy some magnesium, so I'm going to go to a few sites, check it out, see who's got the best product, the best price, shipping, and all that. And inevitably, Nick, when I get done with looking at all those different products and different sites, I will get in my spam boxes all kinds of stuff that tells me, oh, go to this vitamin store and that vitamin store. These are not ones that I have visited. Now, some people say, oh, those are cookies or whatever, but it just almost inevitably, doesn't matter what I'm looking up or what I'm researching or what I'm studying, and I only spend just like maybe an hour or two at a most on anything that I do. It's not like I spend days or weeks or the whole day just looking up one thing, right? It's like looking up a word. I'll go up and look up a word, and then all of a sudden, I get all this other stuff in my email. And it has always just kind of not set well with me. So when you say that, the internet's kind of almost self-aware, I'm not so sure that hasn't been plugged in, to a different space, so to speak. Seriously, I mean, that's just not coincidence when that kind of stuff happens repeatedly. And so, note to self and anybody else who's listening out here tonight and in the future, don't spend a lot of time on any one thing because you can bring it to life, literally, right?
Yeah, and that's sort of the whole concept. And then, of course, when you bring them to life, then the dangerous part begins because they then sort of start to exist and become more and more sort of physical, if you like, and tangible, and become separated from the creators. And then, of course, it becomes very difficult to uncreate them. When they've been created, they want to hang on to the life that our collective mindset has given to them. And so then they typically become hostile to us because they don't want to be deconstructed. They don't want to be disintegrated and sort of thought out of existence in the same way that they were thought into existence.
Let's see. There was an old movie many, many years ago. What was his name? Gutenberg. Steve Gutenberg was in it, called Short Circuit. And it was all about this little rogue robot that was built. And he broke away from the pack. And, of course, the military was the one that had created all these robots. And it was trying to find this robot, and this robot kept saying, I'm alive, I'm alive. He was number 5, by the way, and he goes, I'm alive, I'm alive. And, it's just what you were saying. It's like once they're created, they have a survival mechanism, regardless of whether it's got a soul or a spirit or what have you. It's still a survival mechanism, not any different than a human being or any kind of creature or even a plant or an animal that exists on this planet and elsewhere, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think you can find examples of this, all over the place. I mean, it's interesting that Eric Knudsen, who created the Slenderman for this contest, by his own admission, he was actually sort of inspired by a lot of weird things in the world of the paranormal, like, for example, the Men in Black. And the Men in Black, actually look and very similar to the shadow people that you mentioned earlier. And then, as I'm sure you know, there's this one group within the shadow people known as the Hat Man, where he wears this old-style hat. And, of course, the Men in Black still wear those old kind of hats. So I think, there's a possibility that some of these sort of Men in Black type stories could be similar things that the human mind is sort of fixated on, and possibly, they've been created in a similar fashion. And maybe also things like the black-eyed children, they may well have been sort of, when you had a few years ago, you had this sudden surge of people taking an interest in this phenomenon of the black-eyed children, these sort of creepy, pale-faced kids with totally solid black eyes. One of the theories is with them that they could be thought forms that have attracted the attention of so many people that they've been inadvertently brought to life as well.
You know, did you ever do any writings on the black-eyed children?
Yeah, I've done a few chapters in books here and there, and it's, you know, it's caused a bit of feedback where people have said, you know, I experienced this, or I saw the black-eyed kids, and you know, one of the reasons why I think, you know, they could be tied in with this whole thought form angle is that in the early stages, it was as if the black-eyed kids weren't sort of self-aware of what they were. It was almost like they were acting in a like a programmed way rather than independence, and that goes along with some of the theories for the early stages of thought forms that, to begin with, when they're starting to develop and come to life, so to speak, they really aren't fully aware of what they are, you know, but they go along with this kind of program belief system that we have for them, and then over time they become sort of more aware of what they are.
You know, somebody just asked a question in the chat room, and I'm gonna go ahead and repeat it here. It says, I still do not understand why they must be negative entities. This may be my issue of thick-skulledness, but no, it's not. Listen, most people will buy into a negative thing because it's the first, it's what most people see. It's on the surface. And in order to get into the positive things in life, you have to get underneath the surface of things, right? And so it'd be, you know, if you want to take up a cause, that would be a really good cause for you to take up, which is to spread positive and let people see the positive instead of the negative. That's always the counter to that. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right. I mean, that's actually a good question that the questioner asked about why are they always these thought forms negative. And one of the reasons is purely and simply because people are sort of more excited by the idea of trying to create something that is sort of horrific or threatening or, you know, sinister. You know, that's why you don't see you know, people trying to create thought forms of, I don't know, like Tinkerbell or something like that, because people don't want to conjure up, for the most part, sort of nice little positive things. They want to conjure up things that are going to, you know, sort of terrorize you in the middle of the night. People just kind of have that, you know, for some reason, all of us people, we all like that kind of sense of fear. You know, it's why roller coasters are so popular. You know, people get a thrill out of being terrified. And it's kind of a similar thing. People, to a degree, get a kick out of the terror created by things like the Slenderman, not realizing that it can go too far and then it becomes very dark and disturbing. But that's the main reason why they're so negative, these entities, because people are kind of turned on by the idea of creating something negative rather than something that's friendly.
You know, and so let's look at our daily news, right? Anybody that watches the news, which I don't. I quit watching it years ago because of this reason. Because everything that's on the news, which is really just part of our programming, right? You turn on that TV set and you've got programming coming into your house. And the programming, I'm not talking about just from the television station. I'm talking about programming. It programs us to accept the negative, and that's just the way of life, is the negative. And it's also, there's another part of that people create this negative thing because it is also about sensationalism. They can get attention for this for a short term. Now, whenever we're talking about fear or anything like that, instead of, like you said, like a Tinkerbell, and when you're developing something that's positive, it's usually long lasting. It has a duration, a longer duration. But when you create something that's negative and fearful, it's a spent emotion. So it goes away. Like when you get off the roller coaster, you might talk about it for 10 minutes or so about, wow, what a rush, you know, whatever. But then you're on to the next thing, right? But when somebody imbues you with something that's positive and that positivity stays around you, it's hard to be negative when you've got positivity around you. So you kind of take up the reins and you become, you know, more happy. Happy is a long duration as opposed to a fear-based or even rage. Rage is something that's spent. You spend it. You spend your fear. Unless, of course, you're just always in fear over everything. And there's people that do have phobias such as that, but I'm not talking about those kind of people. Just regular folk, right? So I think that's part of it. I think that's part of some of it, that it creates a sensationalism, and, you know, hey, they get some kind of, you know, byline in the paper, or, you know, something splattered all over the internet saying, hey, so-and-so created this, and, you know, so they get their 15 minutes worth of fame.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, you know, when people do get into sort of a negative mindset, it does kind of attract negativity. And I think that's why, you know, if you're going to focus on something like the Slenderman, which is sort of dangerous and negative and hostile, well, those kind of emotions and feelings are going to spill over even more if the Slenderman starts to get, you know, invade your dreams and that kind of thing. And, you know, it's kind of, you know, the concept of people talk of, you know, sort of psychic vampires, people who you talk to them and everything's negative, and by the end of an hour of talking to them, you're just wiped out and exhausted, you know, because everything in their life is negative. And the reason why is because they are negative. It's like, you know, the more negative you are, the more negativity you attach, or becomes attached to you. In the same way, the more danger that you're kind of pulling forward in relation to the Slenderman, the bigger the chance is that you're going to have a bad experience with it when it's created. So, you know, I think, you know, people say, well, how can just this one person have so much bad luck and negativity in their life? Well, it's simple. It's because they get up in the morning and think of the worst scenario possible, you know, and when that keeps happening, it just attaches itself to you, you know, it's like glue.
So let me ask you a personal question here. You can choose to answer it or not. You know, this is a free form here. How do you, when you've written a lot of things that are about a lot of scary things, you know, not all of them are, but some of them are very scary, and we're specifically talking about the Slender Man. What do you do for yourself personally after writing a book that, I mean, you have always been in your books, always been pretty even keel. You present the information, and then you always give your own opinion of it or what you think of it. But how do you let go of all of that so that you're not carrying around all that stuff that you write about?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's actually two ways. One, I guess, you know, as the author of the book or books, I guess I'm sort of quite fairly detached because I'm telling the stories of other people, you know, and looking at the concepts and theories, how things like the Black-Eyed Children or the Slender Man or Men in Black or the Shadow People might exist. In other words, I'm not someone who's, you know, had that experience to a great degree of, you know, endlessly being woken up in the middle of the night with this shadow person looming over the bed. You know, I'm sort of more like
you're not
a journalistic approach, like a detached approach. But also, you know, when I'm sort of working and writing, I keep it sort of very, you know, I have sort of my boundaries. And what I mean by that is, so I like to get up and I sort of work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, writing about all this, you know, and researching it. But then 5 o'clock comes round, I stop. And weekends, I never work. I mean, for me, you know, people are actually quite surprised, you know, that I have what I quote a normal life. You know, I mean, Friday night, you know, I'm big into soccer. So Friday night, me and a bunch of friends, we usually go down the local sports bar and watch a couple of soccer games on a Friday night. Saturday night might be taking a girlfriend out to see a band, you know. And I just, regular stuff. And I just totally switch off. I don't sort of do this 24/7 because I think, for me, I would end up in that position of becoming obsessed with it all, and then it would start, the phenomenon, I think, would then start getting its grips into me because I wouldn't be doing anything else other than fixating on this. And that's why I don't really get that, because I really do switch off at like 5, and I really do finish at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and don't do anything else until 9 o'clock Monday morning. And for the, like I said, for the entire weekend, it's just just normal stuff, So
well, that's excellent. That's excellent. No, I think that's a good regime. I mean, not everybody can do that, but I knew you were a journalist. I mean, you've written for a lot of different publications, and not just paranormal stuff either, or metaphysical or what have you. You've also written about some very wonderful things that doesn't have anything to do with those particular genres. So I think it's good that you keep yourself relegated and say, I'm not going to own any of this. I'm just a researcher giving out the information, and people can do with it what they will. But you're always very good in your books of being very cautious with people, saying, do your own research, but be careful doing it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's a good reason for that. I think it's important, and, to take the responsible way of, I can present what my theories are on the Slender Man and how it came to existence after being just an internet creation. I can share my theories and thoughts and conclusions, but what I don't think is right is for me to demand that people 100% believe in my theory, because I could be wrong. It's kind of like the worst thing you can do is almost like indoctrinate someone with your belief system, because then it becomes like you become like a cult leader or something, you know what I mean? Telling people how to live and what they should do. And for me, that's wrong. I think the important thing is to share data, to share information, and hopefully combined we can all come to finally an answer. But, for me to be sort of banging on the table saying you will believe this and you will listen, you will agree with my approach, to me that's wrong. That's kind of like some crazy preacher, saying if you don't listen to me, you'll burn in hell. We've got to prove hell exists before you can say that, And so for me, I think that trying to tell people, that your belief system, you can prove this is the answer. I'm honest enough to admit I cannot prove that the Slender Man came to life in the way that I think it did, but I do think it came to, to existence in that way. But I'm honest enough to admit I cannot prove it, and I think it's important that I let readers know that, this is my thought or my concept or my idea. And maybe one that's shared by, hundreds of others, thousands of others, but there might be other people who have a different belief system. And I think it's right that that person can air their belief system as well. Like I said, otherwise you become like some sort of dictating cult leader, just having your followers hanging on every word, which is a dangerous path to go down,
It is, and I have to say, you are a man full of integrity, and for that I appreciate that, and kudos to you, Nick. Seriously.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, it's the worst thing I can think of is things like the Heaven's Gate people, when they were all indoctrinated into killing themselves, all in the name of this alien spacecraft coming on this Hale-Bopp comet. That's a perfect example of people where you have a cult leader who says you'll believe this and you'll believe that and you'll follow my every word and my every word is accurate and correct and you'll do this and we'll all go to some new dimension when we've killed ourselves. And they all did that. That's like the worst example possible of how, you can have someone demanding they accept your version of events as correct. All I can do is sort of present theories and ideas and say, well, this is what my conclusion is. But, somebody like Robin Swope, who I interviewed for the book, some of Robin's opinions were different to mine. Other people I interviewed for the book, they had different opinions to mine. But we're trying to come up with an answer. We're not trying to force one particular answer,
So back to the whole premise of, and I think that's perfect because you said a lot of things in there and I hope people were really listening. It's called Think for Yourself. Use discernment. Don't get caught up in fads and, this is just because it looks like something doesn't mean it is something unless you start believing in it yourself. You know what I mean? Which is kind of your whole premise behind this, and the premise of others, not just you, but the premise of all this is that this was a depiction of something that somebody put down on, on pixels or on paper, whichever the case may be, maybe both, and it was kind of brought to life in that sense. You have to be careful of your thoughts, but seriously, you do. You have to be really careful of your thoughts, and because you don't want to bring that kind of stuff into your space. But this being part of all of this, what do you see for the trend in this? I mean, it's more or less kind of burn itself out as far as notoriety. The Slenderman thing. Although they brought it back because of the girls, they brought back those girls a couple of days ago, as I was telling you. So what's your thought process on this? Have you been following with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the Slenderman following is not going away anytime soon. I mean, if you just type in the word Slenderman, or just one word, into Google, you actually get more than 7 million results.
Oh.
I mean, that's I mean, literally 7 million just independent results. So that just demonstrates the sheer fascination and obsession with this phenomenon. I mean, certainly not so much adults, but certainly kids, teenagers. That's sort of the prime audience, if you like, for the Slenderman, and the following is incredible in terms of the size of it, and as I said, kids get obsessed with it. They, as well as kind of constructing a thought form version of the Slenderman, there's also just a straightforward assumption that it's come to life as well. So people, their grip on reality starts to, sort of become shaky, and the sort of, the lines get blurred between what's real and what isn't real. And certainly with the two girls in Wisconsin, that's a perfect example. Now, what happened with them, excuse me, it was on May the 31st, 2014, when two 12-year-old girls from the city of Waukesha, Wisconsin, and Waukesha is actually a small city. It's a suburb of Milwaukee. And the two girls became very, very obsessed with the Slenderman phenomenon. One of them even claimed that she saw like a Slenderman-type figure in her bedroom when she was a very little girl. She was only 12 when the attacks occurred. What happened, the three girls had a party the night before. It's one of the girls' birthdays, so they're like a sleepover, slumber party. And everything was fine the next morning. The two girls that initiated the attack, Nisa Weir and Morgan Gaser, they lured one of their friends, Peyton Leutner, into a wooded area of a local park in Waukesha. And one of the girls attacked Peyton Leutner with a knife, stabbed her no less than 19 times. And it was only by a miracle, that she didn't die, because a number of the stab wounds were very close to major arteries and organs, and she could have died very, very quickly. Now, when the two girls were taken into custody, they told the police that they felt, or they fully believed, this wasn't like a ploy to try and get off by a plea of insanity or whatever. They fully believed in the existence of the Slenderman. They fully believed that by essentially killing and sacrificing Peyton Leutner, that they would become, as they said in their own words, the Slenderman's proxy, and they were going to follow him into the local woods where they believed he had this creepy mansion, and they were going to live with him for the rest of their lives. Now, the police quickly picked them up as they were sort of heading off to this area of forest, and fortunately, a guy on a pedal bike, happened to see Peyton Leutner sort of crawling out of the woods, and luckily, so the emergency services were on the scene quickly, and a life was saved. And fortunately, also, she's made a very good recovery. She's back to normal now, both physically and psychologically. But the two girls that initiated the attack, I mean, they're not in prison. They're only 12 when they did the attack, but they're basically, they're perceived as being a potential threat to society, and they're sort of now just behind closed doors, so to speak, and they'll be well into their 40s or even 50s. With the one girl who actually did all the stabs, they're going to be well into middle age before they're actually released back into society. And this is sort of the perfect, I'm going to say perfect, I mean in a bad way, but perfect in the sense that it defines how this terrible kind of obsession develops in the people who become obsessed with the Slender Man. And whether they see the thought form version or not, that they still come to believe almost, to a point of no return in the existence of the Slender Man. And, they follow every story. They dream about it, they write about it, they put it in their journal. And for all intents and purposes, it's a real living entity. And as I said, that's sort of, the definitive example was the attack in Waukesha. But in the weeks afterwards, there are other examples of young girls. One where a mother attacked her mother and almost killed her as well. Another one where a girl tried to, actually succeeded in burning the house down, and her mother and brother just managed to escape in time. And when the police looked into the background, both of those girls were obsessed with the Slender Man as well, and had journals filled with information about the Slender Man and how they could relate to it and so on. So, again, it's become sort of, like a modern-day Freddy Krueger, where you kind of start dreaming about it and it comes to life,
Well, that just had a whole bunch of stuff in there. First of all, it makes you wonder why these children, and first of all, children are very susceptible. I mean, we believe a lot of things that what we would call people in positions of authority, whether that be parents or teachers or role models or whatever. In this case, the Slender Man for these two girls, I mean, they're only two out of, I don't know how many millions are actually out there kind of worshiping this thing. And it's just a feeling of belonging. And, that speaks terrible. That speaks terrible to our society and to our times that we live in. And we need to correct this. It's a course correction that's way past overdue, because we're getting into so much technology, and the technology in and of itself is not always healthy. Matter of fact, most of it isn't healthy. We talk about the internet, but there's 5G, but we go into the internet and it can consume people. I mean, I know people that are my age that's all they do is sit at the computer all day and play and do stuff. And when I'm at my computer all day, I can't wait to get up from it. I'm working, I'm doing things. I'm, updating my site. I'm writing. I'm doing whatever, right? I'm not just playing on the computer. I'm not just going in there and just searching and looking up stuff. I'm not obsessed with it. If I don't have my computer, I'm okay with it. But there are people out there that aren't, and these young kids that are given this technology, my granddaughter was in preschool and they gave her a tablet. They started using a tablet when she was 4 years old. They're indoctrinating our kids into this technology, and half of them don't know how to write very well. They certainly don't know how to read very well, and put sentences together, because everything is done for them, because it's all computerized and, it's all technological information that they can get. They don't have to learn anything. They can just go in there and copy and paste and do all that kind of stuff, right? It speaks to the times, and I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about the rest of the Slender Man. But I did want, before because we'll move off the subject here a little bit later. We'll be due for a break coming up here, probably in the next 3 to 5 minutes, and I don't want to get into too many topics that we can't get out of or we get interrupted. But I do want to talk to you too about some of the other things that kind of go along with this, did you not do a book on the Mothman prophecies or Mothman?
I haven't done a book on it, no, but I've done chapters in various books on Mothman, yeah.
I must have read those because I for some reason I have that in my mind, Nick, that you have some information on that. And then, I'd like to have you speak a little bit on some of the other books that we haven't talked about because it kind of ties in with some of these things that we're talking about with the Slenderman, although it has its own kind of arena, so to speak. But, like the Loch Ness Monster and all of those things. And because we haven't had you on, and so some of those books have been out for a while. But I'd like for you to speak on those if you could when we come back after break. And we'll kind of tie all that in with the Slenderman thing, because I don't know where you might see this going, and I know you probably have a theory. I really regret that I didn't get your book. Honestly, I do, because I didn't get a chance to read it, to read it or anything. So I'm kind of just flying off the cuff here, being totally uneducated with your whole process that you went through, because I really do enjoy your books. They're very easy to read. I can follow them very well. I like your thought processes and your research that you do on it. You're really thorough. And then I lost my train of thought of what I was going to follow up with that.
Well, what I would say, I actually agree with you about the internet. I think on the one hand, it has been incredibly massively helpful, particularly in terms of people staying in touch with each other, across the planet even, never mind just, the next town or whatever. And, for making things easier in terms of ordering things online, that kind of thing, and instant news. But you're right, in terms of how it's affecting people's characters, I'm sure it's the same with you. When I was a kid, me and all my friends would be out in the little village I used to live in England, and my mum and dad would be like, well, make sure you're back by the time the moon's come up, or the sun's down. And we'd be sort of like 6 or 7, we'd riding our bikes, at 8 o'clock at night around town. And you'd fall off your bike and you get bruises and cuts, and you go to school the next day and, teacher say, what you doing? I said, I fell off the bike, and nobody thought anything of it. But today, it's kids are taught, well, you mustn't go outside, or you'll be killed, you'll be murdered, and you go to school the next day, you fell off your bike and you got bruises. Next thing you know, the police are brought in. What's been going on? You questions about your ability to look after your children. It's like things have just gone crazy. And on top of that, you've got the fact that the one thing that the internet does, and in a terrible way, is that it has isolated kids where their best friend is their iPad or their iPhone, texting each other instead of having a good time, riding around town, and having fun, having adventures, which you're supposed to do as a kid. You're not supposed to sit at home just texting and focusing on pictures of the black-eyed children or the Slender Man, because you put all that isolation and obsession together and disturbing images, and eventually you're going to have, it's just going to explode. People aren't meant to be sat at home doing nothing other than pressing buttons, Yeah. You might as well be in jail.
Exactly, and we're going to pick that up when we come back. We're due to go for a break here in just a couple seconds, so I want to invite everyone to stay with us. With Nick Redfern, we're going to be talking some more about the Slenderman phenomena, as well as what's up ahead as far as where are we going as a society in a whole. Stay with us. All right, everyone, welcome back. And you are listening to Journeys with Rebecca in the second hour. We're here visiting with Mr. Nick Redfern, talking about the Slenderman Mysteries. And we left off at the bottom half of the first hour talking about, Nick was expressing about how kids today, they go to school and they've got skinned knees and bruises, and of course then, everything changes. And now everybody has to go out with elbow pads, knee pads, helmets, gloves. They have to gear themselves up just to take a bike ride. And, I'm all for safety. Don't get me wrong. I really am. I'm all for safety. But it does speak to the fear-mongering and the fear that society as a whole has placed on all of us. And, when we talked about Slenderman Mysteries in and of itself, we were also talking about how it denotes fear when people even hear the term Slenderman. So, that's part of our society. And I believe that we need to get back to, more of like what Nick was talking about. My childhood was the same way, Nick. I mean, I rode up and down gravel roads, for heaven's sakes, on my bike, and I fell off it more times than I was probably on it especially when I first learned how to ride a bike. And, I played ball. I mean, I was outside after breakfast in the morning when I was on summer vacation in school. You wouldn't catch me back in until it was time to eat dinner, just at dusk.
Yep.
I was outside playing, and, we didn't turn on the TV. The only time we ever turned on TV was Saturday morning cartoons. That was the big deal. And, of course, got 5 channels or something like that. They may even have been a little bit before your time, Nick. I'm not sure. In any case, it does speak to what we have become as a society is we have bought into the fear of this, the fear of that, the fear of germs. I mean, everywhere you go, they've got hand sanitizers and, you've got all these sanitizers. When you go into the grocery store and get a grocery cart, they got these little sheets that you can get and wipe down your carts. And, what we've done is we've taken away the experience of being a human, and you take away your immunities when you do things like that. And so when you get into that fear mode is a very destructive force, as we've seen, just in itself, talking about the Slenderman Mysteries. It's a fear thing. And those girls, I would suspect, not only were they fearful, it's kind of like the bad boy syndrome, they used to call it in my day, where you were attracted to the bad boy kind of thing. And it was this repulsion attraction thing. So here we are in the Slenderman thing, and here's these girls attracted to something that I'm sure they must have felt was like off limits, and yet it was desirable to them. And a 12-year-old not understanding those kind of emotions or those thoughts or whatever, it does speak to that. And you had some interesting things to talk about. And I was telling JP and you, I don't know if you were still here, if you was getting your drink or not, but I was saying, we have some of our better conversations sometimes when we're not on air or in the breaks and before and after the shows, So there was a couple of things that you really wanted to speak about that was of interest in regards to the Slenderman Mysteries, because the first one just really blew my mind. And I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about that, because it really is pretty fascinating, and there's something maybe to be said about that.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people don't know, and I actually suspect that, when the girls went to trial and, the prosecution, the defense, the psychological experts brought in, psychiatrists, that kind of thing, I actually don't think any of them probably had any awareness of what I'm going to say now. But, and of course, the courtroom obviously isn't really a place, to debate the merits of the supernatural or not. But what I do find intriguing is that whole area, Waukesha, where the attack occurred in 2014, most people don't know that there have been similar things to the Slender Man actually seen in that area, very weirdly seen before the Slender Man was actually created in 2009, in fact decades before. There's one example where in 1921 the body of a young boy was found floating in a pool in Waukesha, and he'd been murdered, unfortunately, just a terrible child killing. And he was never actually identified. He was buried in an unknown grave. But he was known, or he became known by the police and the local media as Little Lord Fauntleroy, which was named after a story of this sort of rich little boy in a rich family. And he was called that because when they found the body of the boy, his clothing was very clearly, expensive clothing, so that's why he got the nickname of Little Lord Fauntleroy because they didn't have his real name. Now, what's interesting is that a psychic looked into this and, excuse me, and she saw this vision of this tall, thin figure in a black suit carrying the body of the boy through the woods. And, you know, with hindsight, it sounds just like the Slender Man. And one of the people I interviewed for my book on the Slender Man, a guy named Mike Huberty, and Mike told me how he'd seen a similar thing just a couple of miles from where the 2004 attacks occurred. But Mike saw a similar thing, like this tall, skinny figure, dark black. He saw it in the mid-1990s. So, in other words, even though Eric Knudsen created the Slender Man by name and with the suit and everything else in 2009, one of the theories is that this, if you go back, you can find sort of similar archetypes to the Slender Man, sort of tall, skinny, supernatural figures that pop up throughout history and mythology going back thousands of years. And, you know, I suspect that what's happened is that that kind of imagery is embedded in our subconscious, and so every so often this figure, this entity resurfaces with sort of a new identity and a new name. And unknowingly, you know, we think we're creating it, but it's actually kind of embedded in our sort of our psyche, if you like. I mean, another example that sort of perfectly portrays that, there's the very centuries-old folk tale / fairy tale of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, which is a story that goes back sort of 500-600 years. This story from Germany, the little town of Hamelin in Germany, where it becomes infested by rats, and the mayor of Hamelin doesn't know how to get rid of all the rats, and suddenly this creepy, tall, skinny figure in a dark outfit and kind of looking strange comes into town and offers to get rid of all the rats. And he does that by playing this sort of supernatural flute, which the music hypnotizes the rats, and they all follow him towards the river, and they all fall into the river and drown, so all the rats are gone. But then the mayor decides he's not going to pay the piper for getting rid of the rats. So the piper turns the tables on the people of the town, and when all the adults, all the grown-ups, the parents are in church, he starts playing his flute, and he hypnotizes all the children, and they all follow him into the woods and then through this portal-like doorway into the mountains. And again, if you read that story, the story of the Pied Piper, this tall, skinny, strange-looking figure who comes into town and hypnotizes and controls all the children, that's like 500-600 years old, but it sounds just like the Slender Man. And so, you know, we have the Slender Man by name and appearance today. Back then you had the Pied Piper. In Germany they have a similar one called Der Grossmann. And you can find these sort of archetypes all around the world. And I think the Slender Man, yes, Eric Knudsen created it, but I also think there's a chance that part of the creation was embedded in not just his mind, but in all of our minds, this sort of creepy figure that alternates between being like a Slender Man or the Shadow People or the Man in Black. It's always like a figure in a dark outfit that menaces us, you know, in different eras and different cultures and countries and different names, but it all comes down to like a very similar thing.
So, in your estimation, because you've written books on the Slender Man and you've done some research on that, but you've also written about the Men in Black and the Women in Black. Is there a resemblance from the Slender Man to the Men in Black?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you know, the main thing, obviously, is the black suit. You know, the Slender Man suit is sort of like a skinny, tight black suit, white shirt, skinny black tie, which is just like the Men in Black. Now, you know, you mentioned before yourself with the Shadow People, and there's this one category of the Shadow People known as the Hat Man that wears this old-style fedora. Well, a lot of the Men in Black today are reported wearing black fedoras. They're not like the movie versions like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. No. They're sort of like pale-faced, vampires. They look like the dead just dug up, They're nothing like the movie versions at all. They're more sort of like something out of a gothic horror story. So I think there's crossovers with all these things. Like the Hat Man, the Shadow People, the Men in Black, the Slender Man, even to a degree the Black-Eyed Children. They're pale and they dress in black, and they come knock on people's doors late at night and control their minds. And so I think it could well be just one phenomenon that sort of almost shape shifts for the perceptions of different cultures and belief systems, So yes, they all look similar because you interpret it as you expect it to appear in your era, in your culture, whereas 300 years ago it might have appeared slightly different, and 500 years before that, different again. But it basically, we create these things, but we create them according to what is kind of in vogue with our culture or our society at that particular time.
I've always said our land, the Earth globe itself, there's just like, how many millions of years of history actually resides on this planet, and, all those vibrations and resonance and their, energies are embedded into this planet. And, I believe that some of that stuff, I call it residual energy. I mean, it's present everywhere you go. I mean, as a clairvoyant, I can go certain places and, stuff just pops up. And, it's ancient old stuff. Some of it's more recent, like, within the last 200 years, but some of it's really old. But, it's there. And so with what you're talking about makes it resonate with me somewhat that this Slender Man could have been a product of this young man's, psyche, call it the collective consciousness, call it residual energy. It could be cyclic in nature. It could come during different phases of time frames, whether it be astrologically aligned or whether it be years aligned, or there's certain events that take place. I mean, I don't know. Obviously we've never measured anything like that, but for me, that doesn't sound so far-fetched, that it's not cyclic in nature. But my own Shadow Man, he wears a fedora, but he also has an overcoat, but he is dressed all in black, other than he does have a tie on and a shirt, but he is all dressed in black, for sure. But he's not like 8 feet tall or anything, but, I was a 4-year-old kid when I first saw him, and it was a manifestation, because it was a weird experience. I don't really want to talk about it because it really still goobs me out. Really goobs me out. This kind of hits very close to home, but I think you may be onto something about it being, where does this all reside? It very well could have been. I mean, places hold energy. They just do. And unless you clear it or I recognize it or understand it, they're just going to remain. And then every so often they're going to gather strength and, show themselves again, I guess, for the lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah, and I think, that when it's kind of like a spiral, because it's embedded in us, and occasionally it starts to surface and then take hold, because we all kind of have that, like that sort of fear factor that to a degree we enjoy when it's like a safe fear. It's almost inevitable that it's going to like spiral again. It'll start over until people forget about it and it goes away, and then another 50 years later it surfaces as something else, and I think it's like a cyclical thing going on, and that's why I think sometimes these phenomena, they go in sort of like waves where, it's for a particular period of time, people are seeing these phenomena all over the place, and then they're suddenly gone, and they're back 10 years later or something, because people, when they forget about these thought forms, that's what one of the theories is, that when we start to forget about them, because we created them in the first place, they start to sort of self-disintegrate, and they become less and less physical, and they fragment, and they become less self-aware, and eventually there's nothing left of them at all, apart from that residual imagery in our mind. So 10, 20 years down the line, after the Slenderman's finally gone, there might be something else, with a different name, but broadly kind of similar.
Yeah. So, the other thing that you wanted to talk about, by the way, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with what you said there, was about the dreams.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting angle because there are a lot of people who said they've seen the Slender Man in their dreams, or nightmares is probably better. And it's sort of typically in what's known as sleep paralysis, where people typically sort of wake up or semi-wake up in the early hours of the morning. It's usually between about 1 and 3 a.m. And people find they're not able to move properly, or they're completely frozen, completely paralyzed. And they have a feeling that something hostile and dangerous is sort of coming along the corridor towards the bedroom, or is actually already in the bedroom, looming over the bed. And there are a lot of people who've seen the Slender Man in that kind of state, when they're in a dream state, but it doesn't come across like just a regular dream. We've all had a dream that, it's clearly just a dream because you dreamed about something that happened during the day. But there are other dreams that don't seem just like a normal dream. It's almost as if you literally are astrally traveling, as a lot of people believe. If you go back thousands of years, dreams were perceived as not just being, your imagination working overtime when you're sleeping, but the idea that when we sleep and we see people in dreams we've never seen before, and you visit strange lands, the theory is it's not just a dream, that you're actually astrally traveling to other realms and dimensions. Now, one of the people who inspired Eric Knudsen to create the Slender Man, or in terms of his work, was H.P. Lovecraft, who, he didn't really get much recognition in his life as as a horror writer, but certainly today, he's probably seen as the most, or the best, so to speak, 20th century horror writer. Now, by his own admission, H.P. Lovecraft said that a lot of the sort of these ancient fantastic cities and these monstrous creations like Cthulhu and things like this, these strange-looking monsters, H.P. Lovecraft, by his own admission, said, well, I was inspired by seeing these things when I was dreaming. And he never ironically, he didn't give too much thought to the idea that, well, what if he wasn't really just dreaming? What if he was literally astrally traveling? And he actually saw these things, and they were so graphic to him that he was able to incorporate them into his stories. Now, what's interesting is that one of the entities that H.P. Lovecraft not created, but saw in his nightmares, he called them night gaunts, and they were sort of humanoid creatures, but they didn't have any faces, so the face was blank. So that's probably where Eric Knudsen got the idea to have the Slender Man not have a face. And also, one of H.P. Lovecraft's most famous monster creations was Cthulhu, which has these tentacles, masses of tentacles, and that's probably where he got the idea for the Slender Man to have tentacles. Now, if you kind of look at that, and from there it goes to sort of really different weird plane. Now, although H.P. Lovecraft dreamed about seeing these faceless night gaunts, his mother actually saw them when she was wide awake, as if Lovecraft's dreams had actually come to life in some way. And that's another theory with the Slender Man, that if we're thinking about it and you're dreaming about it and having nightmares, that one of the ways you can create the thought form is by dreaming about it, and then it literally strides out of your dream, as the night gaunts did from H.P. Lovecraft's dreams, to where his mother could see them in the physical world. That's one of the other theories, that we dream and have nightmares about the Slender Man, and then it slips out of our dream into our reality. Kind of like if you imagine if you've seen the Matrix movies, where in the Matrix movies we're all actually living in a dream world, and the world around us, which we think is real, is the dream, and the reality is where everybody is sort of contained in all these pods, where we're all energy for the robots. And and that's one of the interesting theories that's being looked at by a lot of scientists today. Could we be living in a real matrix world where reality and the dream state, so to speak, it's hard to differentiate between the two. And I mean, there's a line, I'm paraphrasing here because I forget the actual words, but one of the characters in The Matrix, Morpheus, says to Keanu Reeves' character of Neo, he said words to the effect of, have you ever had a dream that seems so real that if you didn't wake up, you wouldn't know it was a dream? We've all had those kind of dreams where you wake up and you're like, oh, thank God that was just a dream, But you imagine if you never woke up from that dream, you would be absolutely sure it was real, And so that's the theory with the idea that are we living in a real matrix world? That well, if you didn't wake up from a dream, how would you know it was a dream? And that is a viable question, and so one of the theories is that the Slender Man exists in our world because even in the Matrix movies you have these Men in Black type characters called the agents, which are inserted into the Matrix when people get too close to the truth. So one of the theories for the Slender Man phenomenon is that we're in a kind of like a Matrix type world, and that when things happen, or people get too close, the Slender Man kind of, moves in, so to speak. And now, personally, I don't think we're living in a literal Matrix world, but I do think there are times clearly when there are shifts in reality and things aren't quite what they should be. I don't think reality is exactly as we perceive it to be. There are kind of glitches now and again. So, that idea of the crossover between reality and the dream state and something coming out of your dreams and, having some degree of life is an interesting one.
So have you decided you're going to do a book on that next?
Well, I've thought about doing that, the idea of, dreams not being necessarily just dreams and things like prophetic dreams. I mean, if anybody ever dreams of the future and it comes true, well, then it's like, well, if it hasn't happened yet, then reality can't be just all it seems to be. If you dream about something that happens next week and it actually does happen exactly as you remember it, then clearly, there's something that we're not seeing properly. So, I think all of us at some point have had dreams, or even if it's just one, where something happened and then maybe afterwards something happened in the real world that kind of mirrored what happened 4 or 5 days earlier, in your dream. And you're like, oh my God, that was just like, kind of like deja vu, but it was in a dream, So,
well, interesting you brought up that word deja vu. Somebody told me the other day that they thought deja vu was really us having a dream that we didn't consciously remember, and then when the situation happens, then we have full recall of it. I thought that was an interesting concept.
Yeah. I mean, deja vu, there's a lot of theories for it, that it's a glitch in the mind or it's this, but, it's like, why should all of us at some point or another think, just really graphically, wow, I've been through this once before or twice before. Why should we all have that? Why should it just be not half a dozen people in this country and a few in that country? It isn't. It's like everybody at some point in their life has it, and it's like it kind of stops you in your steps. You're like, wow, that was like really weird. It was just mirroring something that you knew had happened, but then how could it have happened?
Yeah, I have to tell you a quick story. When I was probably 14 or 15, I was at a school dance, and I was going up to the counter to get a pop, right? And there was somebody there that I was talking to, and as soon as I went up to the counter and I ordered my pop, then this person came up and the whole thing flashed in front of me. It's my first recall, and I don't know why to this day I still remember it. I think it was just because it was so profound. But I remember the whole conversation played out in front of me before it actually played out in front of me, before I actually opened my mouth. And what I got from it is that the conversation did not go well in my deja vu, my, whatever you want to call that. And so in that moment, I changed my dialogue, and it changed the scene. It changed what actually transpired. That was just, to me, was just totally phenomenal. I was like, whoa, what was that? That was pretty cool. And in those days, the term deja vu and, psychic and, premonitions, prophecy, blah, 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 did not exist. I was just the freak. And it's all good. And, so like, I still remember that. And even now when I have those moments of deja vu, and we all get that, like you said, I don't know that there's a person that I've met that I've known fairly well that hasn't said on some occasion, ooh, deja vu. Been here before, done that, said this, whatever, right? So now when those deja vu moments happen, I get that moment of a remembrance from all those years ago, and I think, okay, do I need to change something here? It's just a microsecond of, communication, and you can go, no, it happened, this will be all right just the way it happened, or no, I need to change this, or, what have you. I really do believe it's a tool that can be used. Just saying.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, it sort of impacts on what, like I said, what is reality and what isn't reality, and, what's a dream, and, that whole issue of not realizing you're dreaming until you wake up. And so what if you don't wake up? Well, you have a dream that you don't realize it's a dream. It's just,
right.
That's the only reason we know that dreams aren't real, so to speak, because you wake up in the morning and you realize then it was a dream. But, as I said, if there was a way to keep you constantly asleep, you would never believe it was a dream. You would believe it was reality.
Well, I will tell you that movie, The Matrix, did open up the eyes of a lot of people. It did expand their awareness as to what could be possible. And I have to agree with you. I don't think that we're all, somewhere plugged in, being food source for, the AI or robots or whatever you want to call them. But I do believe, just like what you said, is that every once in a while I'll wake up, and there's times when I wake up and I'll say it out loud. This is not my world. This is not my life. This is not it. It's like you wake up and you just certainly know that something is different. Not anything that you can pinpoint, but you just know it. You just, and then when you go through your day and you interact with people, you just kind of go, something feels off. And, I think we have to honor those things, just like, talking about, the cyclic things that happen in all of these recurrences of, call it the Shadow Men, call it the, Men in Black, call it the Slenderman, whatever the case may be. It almost, it's like I don't know. I think there is just something to all of this. I really do. I don't think it's just, if it was just one incident by itself would be different, but we've got too many things going on that speak to there's something going on.
Was actually a good film to watch, which actually came out a year before The Matrix, called Dark City, which in many respects is actually a much better movie than The Matrix. And
Dark City.
It's sort of Dark City, yeah. And it was made in 98, a year before The Matrix came out. And in that one, you've got sort of typical Men in Black, the long black suits and the overcoats and the old-style hats. And every night, they change our reality. So, you might go to bed as the president, and the next day, you're a street cleaner or something, but you've got for that 24 hours, you've got full memories from childhood to that night. And then they switch your memories around the next night. And so you're totally somebody else for 24 hours. And another 24 hours, you're somebody else. But for that 24 hours, you've got, as I said, an entire lifetime of memories. And that's a really good one. You saw these creepy Men in Black, sort of pale and kind of like, looking, like I said, like a vampire, but dressed like the Men in Black. And, just mind controlling people and manipulating people every 24 hours. Yeah.
So let's go into a different part of all of this with your Slenderman Mysteries, and some of the prior works that you've done to that. What in your prior works kind of correlates as far as a phenomena like the Slenderman? Any of those that you've done before that has kind of been a phenomena like this? Not internet based.
Yeah, I would actually say a lot of them. I mean, the new one, it's called the Slenderman Mysteries, but and it's only just come out like about a month ago. But it covers a lot of parallels like the Men in Black. And I mean, I've actually done 3 books on the Men in Black and one book on the Women in Black, and then I've actually got another one on the Men in Black coming out in about 2 months. And
okay, you're coming back. You're coming back.
All right.
Coming back.
But there's no doubt that, throughout all those books, the 3 Men in Black books, the Women in Black, the Slender Man, and even, chapters where I've done things on like the Black-Eyed Children or the Shadow People, all those things, you can find sort of mirror images in some of the stories that people tell you. I mean, I've got as many stories of people being woken up in the middle of the night by the Shadow People or the Hat Man or the Men in Black or the Women in Black as I have by the Slender Man. And they all have similarities between them. But you can also find similarities with other creatures. I mean, you can go back centuries or thousands of years where people would have this sort of sleep paralysis and there'd be something threatening in the in their bedroom. You can go back to literally centuries-old stories of a supernatural woman named Lilith, and she was like like a bedroom invader, so to speak, as well. And in Newfoundland, they have a phenomenon called the Old Hag, where people wake up in the middle of the night and are able to move, and there's this sort of screaming old lady sitting on top of them and scaring the life out of them. So I think a lot of these phenomena are actually interlinked, but they don't always seem interlinked. And I think sometimes it's also the fault of particularly sometimes researchers. I'll explain what I mean by that. A lot of people think the Men in Black are just tied to the UFO phenomenon. But when you see these parallels connected into the Shadow People and the Hat Man and the Slender Man, it suggests there's a connection between the UFO subject and the world of the paranormal. Now, a lot of people who research the UFO phenomenon, they want it all to be just nuts and bolts spaceships and aliens, and I think there could be that part to it. But there's also clearly a paranormal aspect which crosses over with things like the Shadow People, and I think sometimes there's a degree of like self-censorship in the UFO field where they don't want to touch the weirder stuff. They just want it to be, the equivalent of their equivalent of our NASA or something like that. So, even within the research community, sometimes there's self-censorship because they get weirded out and freaked out by some of the more supernatural stuff that they think should not be in the UFO subject. So, but for me, in all my books, I just tell it as I see it, and if people like it and agree with it, that's fine. If they don't, well, there's plenty of other books they can read,
Yeah, there's a million of them.
I put the information out. I put the information out for people to see. If they like it, that's fine. If they don't, there's people who like what I do, and there's people who, some people think what I do is dangerous, talking about stuff that is going to give people nightmares. But I'm like, well, what are you going to do? You can't just have people, sort of lying in cushions and being told, oh, well, don't think about that or don't do that. It's like what you came back to earlier, this idea of, people living in fear. And, well, your kids can't go out because they'll be killed, you can't ride your bike outside because you might fall off it. You can't sort of help your dad, I don't know, put the Christmas decorations up or you get electrocuted or something, It's like the world's become just a case where, you've got to live in fear of everything. But, I don't do that. I mean, and no one should do it. We should all strive to do your own thing on your own terms, and if people don't like it, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, then it shouldn't matter. And and if your kid wants to ride his bike, tomorrow night and falls off and got cuts all down his arm, it doesn't mean he needs to be taken off by the child authorities. It means he was just having a good time and fell off his bike like we all did, And
he'll learn not to do that
we need
next
that common
time.
sense back.
Yeah.
We need all that common sense back,
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I think many people have lost that whole ability of having common sense, and truly, we used to call it common sense, street smarts, whatever the case may be. It's being a well-rounded individual. It means that you can see things for what they are, and so let's speak about, because you brought this topic up, and so about the UFO community, and they truly have become, well, a lot of them, I'm not going to say all of them because that's not a fair statement, but a lot of the UFO community has become very nuts and bolts. It is about, what is the species on there? What do they look like? What kind of ship did they drive, and where are they from? But they don't understand that, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, Nick, and everybody who's listening to it, I still think that there are extraterrestrial species, so to speak, that walk amongst us. We have the Shadow Man, the Slender Man, all of these other, you talked about the Pied Piper and all of that. They walk amongst us. Now, are they truly all human? I don't know that they are, right? And I don't know that all of the people that are walking on this planet are totally all human. Just my opinion. I've met some people that their energy signatures just certainly did not match something that would come from this planet, certainly. And not that they were
right.
nuts crazy. Go ahead.
I mean, there are people who, claim to have seen like hybrids, and other people talk about, entities shape-shifting from human to other forms, and even with the alien abduction phenomenon, where the typical image is of aliens taking our DNA and cells and eggs, etc., as part of some scientific experiment. But one of the aspects that a lot of abduction researchers aren't happy about talking about is a lot of abductees have said they felt like their soul was extracted from their body, and these entities was tampering with their souls in some way. And there are other cases where abductees claim to have seen like a ghostly version of a dead relative on board a UFO, or a dead friend from 30 years ago. And none of that kind of stuff sits well with a lot of people in ufology that just want it to be, it's alien scientists taking our DNA in the same way that we would tag a grizzly bear or whatever. But it's not. There's some really weird paranormal overtones in the abduction world. And as I said, particularly with people who felt, these were like soul stealers almost. They were trying to, sort of take our souls because they didn't have souls themselves. That's what a lot of people suspected. And you just don't hear that much at UFO conferences because, it's become almost like a commercialized industry that, we'll talk about this, but we won't talk about that, and I've never understood that. I mean, I think the worst thing you can do is self-censorship yourself, and just put it all out for people to see, really, so they get a full understanding of what's going on.
Well, and I think it's all about education. I think it's about educating yourself, and that means that, like you said, you can't censor yourself, so you can't hold back on the parameters, the outside parameters of what it is. And, when you start doing that, then you are not looking in reality. You're not looking at a bigger picture. You're not looking at potentials and possibilities. I think you said it earlier in the show that you said something to the effect of, I don't think our reality is exactly what we think it is. Well, and I would have to agree with that statement. And when you look at any specific topic or subject, it isn't exactly how it appears, because there's all this other extraneous stuff, and there's levels to everything. There's just a lot of levels. It's not just what's on the surface. There's always what's below it, what's above it, what's around it.
Yeah, and I think the worst thing we can do in the world of the paranormal, which is sort of definitively unexplained, the worst thing we can do is say, well, I know where all the answers are, and here they are, because it's like the UFO subject. Well, the U still actually stands for unidentified, We don't really know what UFOs are, otherwise it wouldn't be called unidentified. And a lot of people forget that, and they kind of create their sort of nice, safe little environment, and it's this and it's that. But, there's so much of these phenomena that we really aren't sure what they are. We just try and put the pieces together. And sometimes we get it right, I'm sure, and other times we could be, way off target, but we think we're on target. I mean, you look at things like Bigfoot. Most Bigfoot researchers will say, well, Bigfoot, they're just some sort of North American unknown ape that science hasn't found yet, and they could be. But there have been reports where people have seen Bigfoot sort of vanish in a flash of a light, or it's sort of disintegrated, or it's been seen with strange lights in the sky, and, weird stuff like that. So, again, maybe Bigfoot isn't just a North American unknown ape. Maybe they are something that is weirdly bizarre and strange. People have talked about seeing, the Bigfoot creatures sort of vanishing into portals or doorways, as if they're zipping in and out of our reality. So, but most people who investigate strange creatures, which is known as the subject of cryptozoology, most cryptozoologists haven't got any time for the idea that Bigfoot is paranormal. It's like, no, it's just got to be the equivalent of a African gorilla, but something we haven't classified. But but the witnesses, it's the witnesses who are telling us that they saw the Bigfoot vanish. There's no reason why they would do that if it wasn't true. So I think we got to look at a lot of these phenomena with a more open mind and not kind of pigeonhole them all. And I would say that even with things like the Slenderman, we could have birthed something that's always sort of hovering around and every so often comes back, and until it finally dies away, and then, it kind of goes into a limbo until it's seen again. I think I could easily understand how that might happen one day with things like the black-eyed children. The interest goes away, and so they start to fragment, and then years later they come back again. That might explain why sometimes, there are reports of monsters like Bigfoot in one area for a week or two, and then it's gone, and it pops up somewhere else. Well, maybe that's what a lot of these things are doing. They're literally flitting in and out of our reality and then turning up in a different part of our reality.
Well, my opinion is, and it goes kind of along with the UFO thing when you're talking about the Bigfoot stuff, is they're looking for specific, everybody wants documentation. Show me documentation. Show me proof. Show me something physical and tangible. And so, they gather up what they think could be hair or, their fecal matter or whatever, and saying, or they can smell them or they could hear them, whatever the case may be. And so they're trying to get some kind of definitive proof that they exist, right? And I have seen enough videos and watched enough stuff. I used to have people send this stuff to me all the time and done some research on the Bigfoot stuff myself. And, all of a sudden you'll have these footprints in the snow and then there's nothing. Yeah. There's no accounting for that because if it was a spaceship, so to speak, come down, then we would have some kind of an understanding or knowing, a showing up of something that would make its imprint in the snow or the ground that shows that there was a ship or something that landed that this thing went up in, right? But I'm more inclined to think that they just pop in and out of our reality, like using a portal or whatever. I mean, we have scientists that talk about portals, and then you have the other scientists that say they don't exist. So, the truth of the matter is you have to figure out what resonates with you. But again, everything isn't as it seems, right? So I'm of the belief and the understanding that Bigfoot are real. They're not just here in the United States. I think they're worldwide. Just like, I think that, the Shadow Man and the Slender Man and all of those Men in Black and all that, they're international. They don't have boundaries, you know. I mean, I just do. I just do.
Mm-hmm.
I think
well, you do get reports from all around the world, and I mean, but then again, you know, you get reports of the Slenderman all around the world. As I said, there's like a German equivalent. You know, you can find. I've got actually in the book itself. I've got 4 cases from the UK, and you know, you get them everywhere. And it's kind of the same with the Hat Man. I interviewed a friend of mine who saw the Hat Man, like the Shadow People, over in England about sort of 10, 15 years ago. You know, these things are everywhere. It's sort of, you know, it's a phenomenon that's worldwide, or phenomena that are worldwide. So I guess it's just our job to just keep pushing, you know.
Well, exactly. You know, I'm going to let you kind of wrap all this Slenderman thing up. I think we've probably got about 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes, something like that to the end of the show. And I certainly want to have you give people the information of where to get your books. I know that is all of your books on Amazon, or just some of them on Amazon and some other places? I can't remember,
Yeah.
Nick.
Well, all the books that I've written are available on Amazon, and probably about 60% you can get off the shelves in Barnes & Noble. And the new book's called The Slenderman Mysteries, and it's like a 300-page, almost, study of this phenomenon where, you know, which really did begun as like a fictional thing, and then, you know, took hold in the real world, so to speak, and now, you know, it doesn't want to be deconstructed again. And he also sort of impacts on how, you know, it causes so much disaster and tragedy in people's lives, you know, and just this sort of totally negative sort of paranormal entity. But so that's the new book, Slenderman Mysteries. People want to contact me. I have a blog called World of Whatever, so if you just type in Nick Redfern World of Whatever, you'll see my blog, and there's a contact point there, and you can also reach me at Facebook and Twitter, Nick Redfern UFO. There's 7 or 8 Nick Redferns on Facebook, but just scroll down and you'll see me with probably a black bandana, and just look out for about 6 or 7 ear piercings, and that's me. So.
Gotta love that, Nick, for sure. So, okay, so to wrap up this Slenderman Mysteries thing, and thank you for sharing, by the way, where to get your books and stuff like that from. And I do highly recommend your books to people. Your way of writing really is easy to read, and not to say that it's elementary or dumbed down. That's not what I mean to say when I say that. It doesn't really sound right when I put it in those words, but it's an easy read. In other words, you are very logical and sensical, and when you pick up a point, you go back and pick that point up, and so it's easy to follow your books, and you have done your research clearly on any topic that you write about, and I've really enjoyed them through the years, and I look forward to more to come, that's for sure. But to wrap up the Slenderman Mysteries, you know, first of all, I'm just gonna put out there that I hope there are no other incidences like what happened with those 2 girls ever again, with anyone in regards to any phenomenon like this, and that we all take measures to make sure that we clear ourselves and just realize that this is the reality, and that we have to do something different. We have to teach our children different. We have to watch what they're doing. We also have to be good stewards of the internet ourselves, and not put out the junk and the stuff, and kind of offset that. That's my final words as far as the Slenderman thing is concerned. So I'm going to let you kind of wrap up the Slenderman thing here, and we'll go forward from there.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, the one thing more than anything else to sort of keep in mind about the Slenderman phenomenon is clearly the people who, you know, become obsessed with it. You know, it always becomes a negative obsession. There's never anything positive about it at all. And I think, when you have all that swirling negativity and isolation with kids particularly, and just fixating and focusing and obsessing on it, none of that is healthy at all. You combine that with the fact that the Slenderman was born on the internet, which has been responsible for, sort of dehumanizing people, kids almost, we're just sitting at home doing nothing and not going out, leaving the house or whatever. I think you put all that together and then you can see how easily, but also how horribly, this has all developed. And I think sort of the sheer negativity has willed the Slenderman away out of the world of fiction into the real world. And I think it would be the exact way opposite, if we all if people try to focus on deconstructing it. But the problem is, there's two issues. The obsession that surrounds it, people want it to still exist. And the other thing, of course, it's very difficult to stop thinking about something. It's all very well say we're all going to stop thinking about it and deconstruct it. But it's kind of like if I said to you, don't think about a pink elephant. What's the first thing you're going to think about, is a pink elephant. So
exactly.
It's kind of like, how do you get it out of your mind? If it thrives on belief, on our believing it, and people can't get it out of the mind, it becomes a more and more dangerous entity. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, I appreciate you being here tonight, Nick. I absolutely love it. Don't forget people to check him out on Amazon.com and World of what?
Whatever.
World of Whatever.
World of Whatever.
Yeah, don't forget to check him out on World of Whatever. And until we meet again, wherever your life's journey leads you, many blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to have Nick back on again real soon after his next book comes out. So thank you all very much for staying here and being with us. And we appreciate it. Thank you. And real quick, Nick, one quick question. Are you planning any UK appearances anytime soon? We got 10 seconds.
No, I'm not. But this coming weekend, I'm actually speaking on the Men in Black and the Slenderman at the Ozark UFO conference in Arkansas this Saturday.
Okay, so if you guys can get there, do so, because it would be great. I wish I could be there. I wish I knew you was going to be there. I would try to have made arrangements. But in the meantime, you guys have a really, really wonderful night. And Nick, I wish you well on your conference this weekend.
Oh, thanks a lot, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, honey. Good night, everyone.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.